On their quiet street in suburban Boston, the porch lights always went out at the same time, as if every marriage there followed a schedule. Daniel Mercer used to believe his did too. Dinner's at 7, Clara's heels by the door, her soft, "I'm home," drifting down the hallway. But that night, her side of the bed stayed untouched, her phone went straight to voicemail, and a single Instagram story, quickly deleted, showed a blurred glass of champagne beside a man's cuff he recognized too well. By dawn, the silence in their house felt louder than any confession. And if stories about love unraveling behind polished doors speak to you, stay a little longer. There are truths here that don't surface until the sun comes up. The house in Brookline had always sounded different after midnight. During the day, it carried the ordinary music of marriage. Cabinet doors closing, Clara's heels striking hardwood, Daniel's low voice on conference calls from his home office. But past 12, the place seemed to breathe on its own. The refrigerator hummed. The baseboards ticked as the November air cooled the walls. Every sound felt amplified in the absence of her key in the lock. Daniel Mercer stood by the living room window, watching the streetlights burn against a thin mist. It was 1:17 a.m. Clara had texted at 8:42 p.m. still at the office. Big client dinner. Don't wait up. He hadn't thought much of it then. Her firm, Bennett and Howe, thrived on urgency. Corporate mergers did not respect dinner reservations or anniversaries. He had eaten leftover pasta alone, scrolling through architectural renderings on his iPad, telling himself this was adulthood. By 11:30 p.m., the wine in his glass had gone warm. By midnight, he had called her, straight to voicemail. He tried again at 12:06, and again at 12:48. Now, at 1:17, he opened Instagram without thinking. Clara rarely posted during work events. She was cautious, curated. But there it was, a story uploaded 30 minutes earlier and already deleted. He saw it because one of her colleagues, Sophie Tran, had reshared it briefly before taking it down. A dimly lit table, crystal glasses catching amber light, a man's navy cuff with distinctive silver cufflinks shaped like scales of justice. Daniel had seen those cufflinks before. Graham Holloway wore them at every firm gala. He locked his phone and placed it face down on the windowsill, as if the image might climb back out. There are moments when the body understands something before the mind allows it. A subtle rearrangement of reality. Daniel felt it then, not rage, not even heartbreak. Just alignment. Pieces sliding into place with a quiet, irreversible click. He walked upstairs. The bed was still neatly made on Clara's side, her pillow undisturbed. He sat on the edge and noticed something else. Her navy silk blouse from that morning was missing from the laundry basket. She had changed before dinner. For whom? At 2:03 a.m., a credit card notification appeared on their shared banking app. Harbolite Hotel, $487.60. Daniel stared at the number. He knew that hotel. Waterfront views. Private suites. Not the kind of place you accidentally end up after a client dinner. He did not call again. Instead, he went downstairs and brewed coffee he did not want. Steam curled into the dark kitchen. The digital clock on the oven glowed 3:11. He thought of the first apartment he and Clara had shared in Cambridge, how they had eaten takeout on unpacked boxes, laughing about nothing. She had once fallen asleep on his chest while studying for the bar exam, highlighter still in her hand. They had promised each other transparency. No secrets. No games. When had silence become easier than truth? At 4:30 a.m., he opened his laptop, not to work, but to look at old photos. Martha's Vineyard. Christmas in Vermont. Her smile wide and unguarded. He searched for clues the way architects search for stress fractures in steel beams. Hairline. Almost invisible, but catastrophic if ignored. There had been signs. Her phone angled away from him. The way she showered immediately after coming home some nights. The subtle impatience in her voice when he asked about her day. He had chosen not to see. By 5:12 a.m., the sky began to pale. Boston's skyline in the distance shifted from charcoal to soft gray. Commuter trains would begin running soon. The world would resume its choreography. Daniel went upstairs and pulled a suitcase from the closet. He packed methodically. 2 suits, jeans, sweaters, his laptop charger. He hesitated over their wedding album, then left it behind. On the kitchen counter, beside the fruit bowl Clara insisted on keeping full even when neither of them ate apples, he placed a single sheet of paper. He wrote slowly, "Clara, I waited. I won't ask where you were. I think we both know that answer would require more honesty than we've given each other in a long time. I can survive anger. I can survive disappointment. I can't survive indifference. When you're ready to tell the truth, not just about last night, but about us, you know how to reach me." Daniel, he did not write the word goodbye. It felt theatrical. This was not theater. This was erosion. At 6:03 a.m., as the first neighbor stepped outside to collect a newspaper, Daniel carried his suitcase to the car. The air was cold enough to sting. He paused once, looking back at the house, the white trim, the bay windows, the life constructed brick by brick. He wondered where Clara was at that exact moment. Asleep in crisp hotel sheets? Awake and calculating her explanation? Or still convincing herself that what she had done was justified by exhaustion, by loneliness, by ambition? The engine started with a low hum. When Clara's phone finally buzzed at 6:17 a.m., a missed call notification she would see hours later, Daniel was already merging onto the freeway, heading toward a furnished apartment downtown he had once rented during a renovation project. The sun rose behind him, casting long shadows across the road. And in the quiet kitchen of the Brookline house, his note waited in the growing light, small and devastating in its restraint. Clara unlocked the front door at 7:12 a.m., expecting the familiar scent of coffee and cedarwood cleaner. Instead, the house felt staged, too orderly, too still. Morning light poured through the bay windows, illuminating dust motes suspended in the air. For a second, she allowed herself to believe Daniel had already left for an early site visit. That would be normal. That would be manageable. She stepped inside, closing the door softly behind her. Her heels echoed against the hardwood, the sound sharp in the silence. "Daniel." No answer. Her gaze landed on the kitchen counter. A single sheet of paper rested beside the fruit bowl, aligned with deliberate precision. Daniel had always been precise. Even his anger, she imagined, would be measured. Her chest tightened before she touched it. She set her purse down slowly, as if any sudden movement might rearrange the outcome. The paper felt heavier than it should have. She read the first line. "Clara." Her throat went dry by the second sentence. "I waited." The words did not accuse. That unsettled her more than rage would have. There was no mention of hotels. No mention of Graham. No interrogation. Only the quiet refusal embedded in the final lines. "I can survive anger. I can survive disappointment. I can't survive indifference." She read that sentence 3 times. Indifference. A flare of irritation rose first, defensive, reflexive. Indifference? She had worked 14-hour days for their future. She had endured endless client dinners and boardroom negotiations. She had fought for partnership in a firm that still favored men with louder voices and fewer doubts. If she was distant, it was because she was tired. Because she carried the weight of expectation like armor. Because Daniel had retreated into blueprints and deadlines, into buildings he could perfect while their marriage grew abstract. That was what she told herself as she folded the letter once, then again. But irritation gave way to something colder. The suitcase was gone from their closet. His navy wool coat missing from the rack. His running shoes absent from the mudroom. Daniel did not make dramatic gestures. If he had left, he meant it. She sank into one of the kitchen chairs, still in last night's dress. The silk clung to her skin, faintly scented with hotel soap she had used at 5:30 a.m., scrubbing herself longer than necessary. The Harbolite suite had been quiet when she slipped out. Graham had still been asleep, one arm flung over the empty space where she had lain. He had murmured something indistinct, half-conscious, confident in the secrecy of it all. She had told herself it was temporary, an escape valve, a way to feel seen in a world that measured her worth by billable hours. Graham listened when she spoke about strategy, about ambition. He treated her like an equal, at least in private. She had not planned to stay the night. Her phone buzzed on the table, startling her. A message from Graham. "Last night was Unexpected. Let's keep communication discreet today. Big meeting at 10. Discreet. She stared at the word. Not are you okay? Not did you get home safe? Discreet. Her thumb hovered over the screen, but she did not respond. Instead, she opened her banking app and saw the charge she had tried not to think about. Harbolite Hotel, $487. Shared account. Daniel would have seen it. The realization moved through her like ice water. She stood abruptly and walked to the sink, gripping its edge. Outside, a neighbor waved while walking her golden retriever. Ordinary life unfolding with cruel indifference. Clara had built her reputation on control. In depositions, she anticipated every question before it was asked. In negotiations, she calculated risk with surgical precision. Yet somewhere between late nights and careful justifications, she had miscalculated the simplest equation: trust. She moved through the house, searching for something, evidence he might return by evening, a sign this was temporary. In the bedroom, his side of the closet looked like a pulled tooth. Not empty, but altered. On his nightstand, his wedding ring was gone. Her own ring felt suddenly conspicuous, a thin band of platinum catching the morning light. She twisted it once, then left it in place. Removing it felt too definitive. At 8:03 a.m., she called him. Straight to voicemail. She did not leave a message. What would she say? It wasn't what you think sounded like a cliché, even in her own head. Instead, she opened her email and drafted a short message to her assistant. Running late this morning. Please reschedule the 9 a.m. call. Her fingers trembled only slightly. As she hit send, she caught her reflection in the darkened laptop screen. Mascara faintly smudged. Lips pale. A woman who had argued multi-million-dollar cases undone by a single sheet of paper. The house felt larger without Daniel in it. Or perhaps emptier. She returned to the kitchen table and unfolded the note again. This time, she noticed the steadiness of his handwriting. No jagged lines. No ink pressed too hard into the page. He had not written in fury. He had written in clarity. That frightened her more than anything. For the first time since dawn, the possibility entered her mind that this was not a temporary separation. That Daniel, quiet and methodical Daniel, might actually choose absence over negotiation. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Graham. Boards already tense. Let's avoid unnecessary attention today. Unnecessary attention. Clara looked around the silent kitchen, the untouched fruit bowl, the sunlight climbing the walls, the space where Daniel had stood only hours before. For the first time, she understood that secrecy had a cost beyond discovery. It hollowed things out from the inside. And now she was sitting in the echo. She picked up her phone again, this time scrolling to Daniel's contact photo. The two of them last summer at Cape Cod, wind in their hair, eyes squinting in the sun. They had looked uncomplicated. She pressed call once more. It rang, then went dead. The quiet that followed felt permanent. She folded the note carefully and placed it back on the counter, as if restoring it might restore him. But the house remained unchanged, bright, immaculate, and suddenly unfamiliar. 3 months earlier, Clara had still believed in lines. Not the dramatic kind, no declarations of temptation, no sweeping confessions. Just small professional boundaries, clear and clean. Graham Holloway had been her supervising partner on a high-stakes merger between two biotech companies in Cambridge. He was known for precision, for reading a room before anyone else sensed its temperature. The first time he praised her in a meeting, it felt earned. Clara anticipated that clause, he had said, tapping the contract lightly. That's why we're ahead. She had felt seen, not as the youngest woman at the table, not as someone who had to prove she belonged, but as indispensable. At home, Daniel had been sketching late into the evenings, immersed in a waterfront redevelopment project. When she described the merger over reheated takeout, he nodded, distracted but supportive. He trusted her competence. He trusted her entirely. Graham, on the other hand, watched her. It began with longer conversations after meetings, strategy discussions that extended past sunset. He would linger by her office doorway, jacket slung over one shoulder. You think 3 steps ahead, he told her once. Most people only see what's in front of them. Compliments are dangerous when they arrive precisely where doubt lives. Clara had worked hard to silence the voice that questioned whether she was merely tolerated in rooms full of men who had inherited their confidence. Graham's attention didn't feel predatory, it felt validating. The first boundary shifted on a Thursday evening. A client dinner ran late, and rain slicked the city streets. Graham suggested a nightcap at the hotel bar across from the restaurant, to go over tomorrow's angles. She hesitated for half a breath, then followed. The bar had been dim, discreet. They sat close enough to hear each other over the muted jazz. He asked about her ambitions, not just partnership, but leadership. What kind of cases she wanted. What legacy she imagined. Daniel rarely spoke about legacy. He spoke about sustainability, materials, skyline impact. Practical things. Beautiful things. But not legacy. When Graham touched her wrist lightly to emphasize a point, she did not pull away. Later, she would replay that moment more than the kiss. The kiss happened weeks after that, after shared late nights drafting revisions, after text messages that drifted from professional to personal. It was in his office, blinds half closed, the city lights flickering below. "You deserve more," he had said quietly. More what? Recognition? Influence? More than Daniel? She did not ask. She leaned in. The affair unfolded not in grand gestures, but in fragments. Early morning messages. Encrypted chats. Meetings that conveniently required travel. Each step justified as temporary, as manageable. She told herself Daniel was distant anyway. That marriages evolved. That physical lines were not the same as emotional abandonment. But the justifications required maintenance. She became careful with her phone, angling the screen away at dinner. She began showering the moment she returned home, washing off perfume that wasn't hers. Daniel had noticed. She knew he had. His silence grew heavier, not louder. In the present, Clara stood in her corner office overlooking the Charles River, staring at the muted winter light reflecting off the water. The note from Daniel lay folded inside her handbag like a concealed verdict. Graham knocked once before entering. He closed the door behind him. "We need to be cautious," he said without greeting. His tone had shifted, less warmth, more calculation. "There's talk. Sophie mentioned someone saw us at Harbolite." Clara's stomach tightened. "You said it was discreet." "It was. But discretion isn't invisibility." He moved closer, lowering his voice. "The board's already sensitive about optics. If this becomes a distraction, a distraction." She searched his face for something personal, for concern about her, about the risk she carried. She found only strategy. "What are you suggesting?" she asked. "That we create distance. For now?" The words landed with clinical precision. Distance. The same word that had defined her marriage for months. "And if questions come up," she pressed. "They won't. Not if we're careful." Careful. Discreet. Distance. Every term felt transactional. For the first time, Clara saw the asymmetry clearly. Graham had more to lose publicly, but less privately. His marriage had ended years ago. His reputation was seasoned, resilient. If scandal brushed him, it would likely slide off. She, however, was still ascending, still proving. A woman in a firm that tolerated ambition as long as it did not disrupt hierarchy. If the affair surfaced, she would be labeled reckless, emotional, compromised. Graham stepped closer, reaching for her hand. "This doesn't change what we have." She looked down at their intertwined fingers and felt something unfamiliar. Hesitation. What did they have? Validation. Secrecy. A room with closed blinds. Daniel's note resurfaced in her mind. "I can't survive indifference." Had she mistaken intensity for care? Outside, traffic moved steadily along Starrow Drive. The world remained indifferent to private collapses. Clara withdrew her hand gently. "Maybe distance is wise," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Graham nodded, relief flickering across his face before he masked it. "Good. We're aligned." Aligned. After he left, she sank into her chair and stared at the skyline Daniel loved to sketch. Glass towers reflecting winter light, transparent and proud. She wondered when transparency had become the one thing she avoided. On her phone, Daniel's contact photo still waited. She had not called again. Instead, she opened a blank message window, and typed nothing. For months, she had convinced herself that the affair was an addition to her life, not a subtraction, that she could expand without consequence. Now, sitting alone in an office that suddenly felt exposed, she began to understand. Every line she had shifted at work had moved something at home, and there might be no clean way to draw them back. The furnished apartment overlooked a narrow stretch of the Charles River, where winter light flattened everything into shades of gray. Daniel unlocked the door with a key the property manager had left in a coated lockbox. The place smelled faintly of detergent and something citrus, impersonal and clean. Beige couch, glass coffee table, abstract art that meant nothing to anyone. Temporary spaces are designed not to ask questions. He set his suitcase down in the bedroom and stood still, listening. No refrigerator hum he recognized. No memory embedded in the walls. Just distant traffic and the soft rush of wind against sealed windows. For the first time since dawn, the adrenaline drained. What remained was not triumph, not even devastation. It was suspension. He sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed and removed his watch, placing it on the nightstand. The indentation on his ring finger felt more noticeable without the band. He had slipped it off before leaving the house, not dramatically, just quietly, as if adjusting to a temperature change. His phone buzzed. Clara. He let it ring. Not because he wanted to punish her, because he did not yet trust his own voice. Instead, he walked to the window. The river moved steadily below, indifferent to human vows. A rowing team cut across the surface in disciplined rhythm, oars entering and leaving the water in perfect alignment. Coordination required attention. If one person faltered, the entire boat shifted off course. He wondered when he had stopped rowing in sync with Clara. It would be easy, almost comforting, to frame the night at Harbolite as the beginning, to isolate betrayal as a single event. But Daniel knew better. Structures rarely collapse from one fracture. It is the unnoticed stress, the repeated pressure, the hairline cracks ignored over time. He replayed the last year, her longer hours, his retreat into work, the evenings when she tried to talk about firm politics and he answered with distracted nods, mind still inside blueprints and zoning permits. The way he had chosen silence over discomfort when he sensed distance. He had told himself he was being supportive, that giving her space meant respecting her ambition. But space, left unexamined, becomes distance. His phone buzzed again. A voicemail notification this time. He did not listen. Instead, he opened his laptop and stared at an unfinished rendering for a community arts center in Somerville. Glass panels, open atrium, shared gathering spaces. He had designed it around the concept of visibility. No hidden corridors, no enclosed offices that isolated leadership from staff. Transparency as architecture. He almost laughed at the irony. At noon, he forced himself to step outside. The air downtown carried a sharper edge than in Brookline, colder between high-rises. He walked without destination, past coffee shops and tech offices and storefronts preparing for lunch rush. His reflection appeared intermittently in darkened windows. A man in a tailored coat, composed, indistinguishable from any other professional navigating the city. No visible evidence of rupture. He stopped at a cafe near Beacon Hill and ordered black coffee. The barista smiled absently, sliding the cup across the counter. Normalcy felt surreal. He sat by the window and finally opened Clara's voicemail. Her voice was steady, almost too steady. Daniel, I know you saw the charge. We need to talk. Please don't make decisions without hearing me. It's not as simple as it looks. He closed his eyes briefly. Not as simple as it looks. Affairs are rarely simple, he thought. They are layered. Ego, loneliness, validation, desire. But complexity does not neutralize consequence. He imagined confronting her, asking direct questions, watching her measure each answer like testimony under oath. What did he want from that conversation? An apology? An explanation? Or proof that the woman he married still existed beneath the ambition and secrecy? His sister, Marissa, had once told him that Daniel avoided conflict the way some people avoid debt, by pretending it would resolve itself. He had hated that observation because it was accurate. Perhaps leaving the house had been less about ending the marriage and more about forcing a reckoning he had postponed for years. But reckoning cuts both ways. He finished his coffee and stepped back onto the street. Snow began to fall lightly, almost imperceptible against the gray sky. Boston carried on, sirens in the distance, pedestrians weaving through crosswalks, life unpaused. His phone buzzed again. A text this time. "Please, just tell me where you are." He stared at the screen. The urge to respond, to anchor her anxiety with a simple address, rose and fell. If he answered now, the dynamic would shift back into negotiation, into explanations and half-truths. Instead, he typed a single message. "I'm safe." He did not include a location. He did not include affection. He slid the phone into his pocket and walked toward the river again. The apartment waited for him, neutral, silent, temporary. A place without shared memories. For the first time since sunrise, Daniel allowed himself to consider the possibility that this separation might not be a tactic. It might be a threshold. If he returned too quickly, he would be returning to the same silence. If he moved forward, truly forward, he would have to dismantle not only a marriage but the identity he had built within it. The snow thickened slightly, settling on his coat before melting away. He exhaled slowly. Buildings could be redesigned. Contracts renegotiated. Trust, once fractured, demanded something far more invasive. And Daniel was no longer certain he wanted to perform the reconstruction. By Monday morning, the air inside Bennett and Hal felt different. Not overtly hostile, not accusatory, just altered, like a room where someone had opened a window briefly and let in cold air that refused to leave. Clara noticed it first in the pauses. Conversations that softened when she approached the break area. A glance exchanged between two associates near the copy machine. Sophie Tran offering a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The firm occupied 3 floors of a glass tower overlooking the financial district. Transparency had always been its aesthetic, glass-walled conference rooms, open collaborative spaces, polished surfaces that reflected confidence. Today, every reflective surface felt like a witness. Clara set her leather briefcase on her desk and opened her email. 32 unread messages. Client updates. Calendar adjustments. One subject line caught her attention. Board committee. Informal discussion. Request no details. Just the time. 3:30 p.m. Her pulse remained steady. Years of litigation had trained her to compartmentalize. Emotion could be acknowledged later. Performance came first. At 9:15, she stepped into the weekly strategy meeting. Graham sat at the head of the table, posture immaculate, expression neutral. He did not look at her immediately. When he did, the glance was brief, professional, indistinguishable from how he regarded anyone else in the room. Distance, as promised. Halfway through the meeting, a junior associate referenced a scheduling confusion regarding Friday's Harbolite dinner. The word hovered in the air longer than necessary. Graham responded smoothly. "Client engagement," he said. "Routine. Routine." Clara kept her face composed, pen moving across her legal pad in even strokes. But beneath the table, her knee bounced once before she stilled it. After the meeting, Sophie lingered near the doorway. "Hey," she said casually. "Rough weekend." Clara met her gaze. "Why?" Sophie shrugged lightly. "Just heard you were downtown late." Harbolite's not exactly subtle. The tone was conversational. Curious, not cruel. But curiosity spreads faster than accusation. "It was a client dinner," Clara replied, matching the neutrality. "Those tend to run late." Sophie nodded. Of course. Of course." By noon, Clara understood that the rumor did not need confirmation to exist. It only needed oxygen. A sighting. A name. A setting expensive enough to imply something beyond business. At 2:47 p.m., her phone vibrated with a message from Graham. "Board skittish. We stick to the narrative. Nothing more." Narrative. Clara stared at the word. She built narratives for juries, for shareholders, for judges. Now one was being constructed around her. At 3:30 sharp, she entered a smaller conference room where 2 members of the executive committee sat waiting. Margaret Shun, composed and surgical in her questioning, and Robert Langford, whose polite demeanor rarely masked his calculations. "Clara," Margaret began, folding her hands on the table. We've received informal concerns regarding professional boundaries. There it was. Not accusation. Not yet. Concern. Clara sat upright, shoulders squared. Concerning? Perception, Robert clarified. Optics matter, especially for someone on partnership track. Partnership track. The phrase felt like a contract clause with invisible conditions. Margaret's gaze was steady. You were seen at Harbolite Friday night. With Graham. Clara did not rush to fill the silence. She had learned that silence unsettled opponents more than defensiveness. It was a client dinner, she said finally. We discussed merger strategy. At 1 a.m., Robert asked gently. The question was not hostile. It was worse. It was reasonable. Clara felt heat rise behind her ribs, but kept her voice level. High-value clients don't operate on 9-to-5 schedules. Margaret exchanged a brief glance with Robert. We're not making accusations, she said. But understand this. If there's any personal involvement that could compromise judgment, it must be disclosed. Compromise. Clara thought of Daniel's note folded in her desk drawer at home. I can't survive indifference. Was this what compromise looked like? Not passion, not even love. Just erosion of professional credibility layered over personal betrayal. There is no compromise, she said carefully. Margaret held her gaze a second longer than necessary. We trust that remains true. Trust. When Clara left the room, her composure held until she reached the elevator. Alone, descending 30 floors, she allowed herself one slow exhale. She had just lied under fluorescent lighting. Not elaborately, not dramatically, but enough. Back in her office, she closed the door and leaned against it. The city skyline shimmered in late afternoon light, indifferent to internal politics. Her phone buzzed again. Daniel. Not a call. A message. We need to talk. In person. Tonight. Her throat tightened. Professional scrutiny was one kind of threat, measurable, navigable. Daniel's quiet insistence was another, more intimate, less predictable. If she met him tonight, she would have to choose which narrative to protect, the firm's or the truth. Outside her office, laughter drifted from a nearby conference room. Life inside Bennett and Howe continued. Contracts drafted, deals negotiated, careers advanced. Clara sat down slowly at her desk and stared at her reflection in the darkened window. She had believed she could manage everything. Marriage, ambition, secrecy. Now the cracks were no longer private. And optics, once fractured, rarely returned to clarity. She picked up her phone and typed a reply. Where? Her finger hovered for half a second before pressing send. This time, there would be no distance. They chose neutral ground. A small wine bar in Back Bay where the lighting was low enough to soften edges, but not obscure faces. Early evening meant the after-work crowd hadn't fully arrived. A few quiet conversations drifted from nearby tables. Glassware chimed gently as a bartender polished stems. Daniel was already seated when Clara walked in. He had chosen a table near the window. Snow pressed lightly against the glass, dissolving into streaks under the warmth inside. He stood when he saw her, a reflex born of habit rather than intention. For a moment, they regarded each other as if across a border. Clara had changed into a charcoal coat, her hair pulled back in a simple knot. She looked composed, almost severe. Daniel noticed the faint shadow beneath her eyes. Hi, she said. Hi. The word felt insufficient. They sat. A server approached, and Daniel ordered sparkling water. Clara declined a drink altogether. Neither of them trusted what alcohol might loosen. Silence settled first. Not hostile, just dense. I didn't know where else to meet, Daniel said finally. His voice was even, almost professional. This is fine. He studied her face carefully, as if searching for structural weakness in something once familiar. Did you read the note? Yes. And Clara folded her hands on the table. I don't think leaving without a conversation is fair. A faint, humorless smile crossed his face. Fair. I was going to tell you. When he asked. Not sharp. Not loud. Simply direct. She hesitated. The pause answered more than any sentence could. Daniel nodded once, absorbing it. How long? The question hovered between them. 3 months, she said quietly. There it was. He did not flinch, but something behind his eyes shifted, an internal recalibration. 3 months meant holidays, dinners, ordinary mornings layered with deception. With Graham? Yes. Saying his name aloud felt like signing a document. Final. Binding. Daniel leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose. The bar's ambient noise continued around them. Laughter at another table, the muted hum of traffic outside. The world remained indifferent. Was it just physical, he asked. Clara considered lying. It would be easier. Less damning. No, she said instead. He nodded again, as if confirming a calculation he had already completed. I kept telling myself it was about work, she continued, words gathering momentum now. He listens to me. He respects what I bring to the firm. I didn't plan for it to turn into a hotel room. Daniel finished, still calm. Her jaw tightened. It wasn't about the hotel. It never is. Silence returned, heavier this time. Daniel traced a fingertip along the rim of his glass. Did you ever plan to stop? Yes. When? After the merger closed. After things settled. He looked at her then, not with anger, but with a kind of exhausted clarity. There's always something after things settle. She felt the truth of that land uncomfortably. Why didn't you tell me you were unhappy? She asked, deflecting, searching for shared culpability. You checked out long before I did. I didn't sleep with someone else, he replied. The simplicity of the statement cut sharper than accusation. Clara inhaled slowly. You stopped seeing me, Daniel. I'd come home, and you were already somewhere else, in your projects, in your head. And instead of saying that, you found someone who made you feel visible. Yes. The admission was soft, but unguarded. He absorbed it. The honesty did not soothe him, it clarified the loss. Across the table, Clara noticed his hands, steady, veins faintly visible beneath the skin. She had once traced those hands absent-mindedly while watching television. Now the space between them felt engineered. The firm knows, she said suddenly. His gaze sharpened. Knows what? They're asking questions. About Harbolite. About optics. And Graham? He's creating distance. Daniel let out a quiet breath that might have been disbelief. Of course he is. The implication settled without being spoken. Graham had more insulation. More leverage. Clara leaned forward slightly. This isn't just about us anymore. If this turns into something public, is that what you're worried about? She stopped. The question was not cruel. It was precise. Am I more afraid of losing my career than my marriage? She opened her mouth, then closed it. The silence answered again. Daniel stood abruptly, then steadied himself, palms briefly on the table. Not anger, containment. I didn't leave to punish you, he said. I left because I couldn't sit in that house and pretend nothing was broken. It doesn't have to be over, she said quickly, the first crack in her composure. We can fix this. He studied her, searching for something beyond fear of consequences. Do you love him? The question stilled everything. No, she said. And this time, it was immediate. He held her gaze, assessing sincerity. Then why risk everything? She struggled for language that didn't sound selfish. Because for a while, it felt like I wasn't risking anything. It felt compartmentalized. He nodded slowly. That's the thing about compartments. They leak. The bartender glanced their way briefly, sensing tension but not understanding it. Daniel picked up his coat. I'm not filing anything yet, he said. But I'm not coming home. Her chest tightened. For how long? I don't know. The uncertainty frightened her more than a deadline would have. He paused before leaving. If we're going to talk about rebuilding, it can't be about optics or convenience. It has to be the whole truth. She swallowed. I told you the truth. He looked at her one last time. You told me enough to stop lying. Then he walked out into the cold, the door closing with a muted finality. Clara remained seated, hands resting on the table where his had been moments before. Around her, conversations resumed their natural volume. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed. In the reflection of the window, she saw herself alone. For the first time, the possibility settled in fully, not as a threat, not as drama, but as reality. She might lose both the marriage and the illusion that she could control the narrative. And there would be no neutral ground left to meet on. By Thursday, Graham no longer came to her office. He emailed instead. Short, sterile messages copied to associates who had previously been excluded from their strategy threads. Meetings that once included only the two of them now appeared on shared calendars with half the litigation team attached. Transparency, suddenly mandatory. Clara noticed the shift immediately. She did not comment on it. Commenting would imply acknowledgement. At 8:45 a.m., she stepped into the weekly executive strategy session. The long conference table gleamed under recessed lighting. Margaret Chin and Robert Langford were already seated. Graham stood near the screen, remote in hand, posture precise. When Clara entered, his eyes met hers for a fraction of a second, flat, unreadable. "Let's begin," he said, voice crisp. Throughout the presentation, he referenced her work clinically. Clara's draft addressed subsection C. Not we. Not shared language. She had built those arguments with him at midnight over encrypted texts and hotel room notepads. Now they were reduced to bullet points. Halfway through the meeting, Margaret interjected. "Given recent concerns about optics, I want to reiterate that all senior associates will report directly to a 3-partner review panel for the remainder of the merger." The room shifted subtly. Eyes flicked toward Clara. Graham nodded smoothly. A wise precaution. Precaution. Clara felt the weight of the word settle like a public label. After the meeting, she remained seated while others filtered out. Graham approached last, closing the door behind him. "This is temporary," he said quietly. "The board needs reassurance." "Reassurance about what?" she asked evenly. He adjusted his cufflinks, the silver scales catching the light. "About impartiality." She held his gaze. "And you're providing that?" "Yes." The answer came too easily. "For yourself," she clarified. A faint crease appeared between his brows. "For the firm." The correction was automatic. "Practiced." Clara rose from her chair slowly. "You said this wouldn't become a distraction." "It won't," he replied. "As long as we handle it correctly." And correctly means what? Professional distance. No ambiguity. Ambiguity. She studied him, seeing him now without the filter of admiration. The careful diction. The calibrated tone. The way he positioned himself 2 steps removed from any risk. "You're asking me to absorb this," she said. "Not accusing. Observing. I'm asking you to be strategic." Strategic. The word that had once drawn her toward him now felt transactional. She thought of Daniel standing in the wine bar, hands steady, asking simple questions that required difficult answers. There had been no strategy in his voice. Only clarity. "Were you ever going to tell them?" She asked quietly. "Tell them what?" "That you were involved too." His expression did not change. "There's nothing to tell." The denial was clean, almost elegant. Clara felt something inside her settle. Not heartbreak, not surprise. Recognition. She had mistaken access for equality, intimacy for partnership. In private, he had spoken of her as indispensable. In public, she was becoming expendable. Outside the conference room, footsteps passed, voices low. The firm continued functioning, contracts reviewed, calls scheduled, reputations guarded. "If this escalates," she said, "I won't lie for you." His gaze sharpened slightly. "I'm not asking you to." But the implication lingered. He stepped back, reclaiming the professional distance now required. "Focus on your work, Clara. Results speak louder than rumors." And then he left. Alone in the conference room, Clara remained standing for several seconds. The overhead lights hummed faintly. The long table reflected her image back at her, fragmented by polished wood grain. At her desk, an email notification blinked. Executive Committee Update. Senior Associate Review Process. Her name appeared under a new column, Enhanced Oversight. Enhanced. The language was so careful it almost disguised the indictment. Her phone vibrated. Daniel's name illuminated the screen briefly before dimming. A missed call. She did not return it immediately. She wasn't sure which version of herself would answer, the lawyer calculating risk or the wife confronting loss. Instead, she opened a blank document and began reviewing contract language, forcing her focus into legal syntax. Clause by clause, definition by definition. But concentration fractured. She imagined the firm without her. The whispers solidifying into conclusions. A career built over a decade reduced to a cautionary tale told in lowered voices. She got too close to a partner. And Graham? He would survive. Men like him always did, protected by history, by networks, by the assumption of authority. For the first time, anger rose, not at Daniel, not even at the firm, at herself. She had believed she could manage dual realities. That discretion was control. That ambition justified proximity. Now proximity was liability. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Daniel this time. Are you okay? The simplicity unsettled her. He owed her nothing, yet he was asking. She stared at the words, feeling the contrast between two men sharpened painfully. One creating distance to preserve himself, the other holding distance to preserve dignity. Outside her office, Sophie's laughter floated faintly through the glass walls. Life at Bennett and Howe remained polished, composed. Clara typed a response slowly. I'm dealing with it. She paused before sending, then added, Can we meet again this weekend? Her finger hovered. If she told the full truth about Graham's retreat, about the review panel, she risked exposing how deeply she had misjudged everything. If she didn't, she would remain alone inside the consequences. She pressed send. Across the river, in an apartment that did not belong to either of them, Daniel's phone would light up soon. And somewhere between optics and honesty, Clara felt the last illusion dissolve. The affair had not elevated her. It had repositioned her as collateral. Marissa called Daniel on Saturday morning before he had finished his coffee. You left, she said without preamble. News traveled quickly through families that pretended not to gossip. I did. There was a pause on the other end. He could picture her in her kitchen in Newton, one hand on her hip, the other gripping the phone. She had always been direct in ways he avoided. Clara came by Mom's yesterday, she continued. She didn't say much, but she looked shaken. Daniel stared out the apartment window. The river had thawed slightly. Patches of darker water broke through the pale surface. She should be, he replied. Marissa exhaled slowly. I'm not defending her. I'm asking what you're going to do. He appreciated that distinction. I don't know yet. You've been married 8 years, Daniel. That's not disposable. Disposable. He thought of blueprints discarded during revisions, of structures redesigned when foundational flaws appeared. Marriage wasn't paper. It was load-bearing. She was seeing someone, he said quietly. Saying it aloud to family felt different, less abstract, more humiliating. Marissa did not respond immediately. Do you want to fix it? She asked finally. The question unsettled him. He had been framing the situation in terms of what Clara deserved, what she had risked, not what he wanted. I don't know if I can trust her again, he admitted. That's not the same as not loving her. He closed his eyes briefly. Love and trust had once felt inseparable. Now they existed as separate variables. Meanwhile, across town, Clara sat at her parents' dining table in Cambridge, hands wrapped around a mug of tea she had not touched. Her mother, Helen Bennett, watched her carefully. Her father remained unusually quiet, fingers steepled beneath his chin. You should have told us, Helen said softly. Not accusing. Disappointed. There was nothing to tell, Clara replied automatically. Her father's voice cut in, measured. Daniel left the house. That is something. Shame felt different in this room. Less corporate, more intimate. These were the people who had celebrated her law school acceptance, who had boasted about her promotions at church gatherings. Is it true? Her mother asked gently. About another man? Clara's throat tightened. She had faced executive committees without flinching. This felt harder. Yes. Silence filled the dining room, heavier than any boardroom tension. Helen reached for her hand. Why? The question sounded less like interrogation and more like grief. I thought I could manage it, Clara said. The honesty surprised even her. I thought it wouldn't touch the rest of my life. Her father leaned back slowly. Affairs always touch everything. He wasn't angry. That almost made it worse. What does Daniel say? Her mother asked. He wants space. And what do you want? Clara hesitated. She had been reacting for days, managing optics, navigating Graham's retreat, defending herself under fluorescent lighting. She had not paused to articulate desire. I don't want my marriage to end, she said finally. Her father studied her. Then you'll have to decide whether you want to protect your pride or your honesty. The phrasing struck her. Pride had always served her well professionally. In marriage, it felt corrosive. Back downtown, Daniel agreed to meet Marissa in person that afternoon. They sat in a quiet corner of a cafe near her office. She did not waste time. "You're not weak if you try to repair this," she said. "But you're not wrong if you walk away either." "That's not helpful," he muttered, though he knew she meant it sincerely. "You think marriage is supposed to be immune to temptation?" she pressed. "It's not. The question is whether this was a mistake or a choice she'd make again." He stared at his coffee. It lasted 3 months. Marissa absorbed that. "That's not impulsive." "No." She leaned forward slightly. "Then if you stay knowing she's capable of sustained deception. And if you leave knowing people will say you didn't fight hard enough." People. Already, he could imagine the quiet judgments at family gatherings, among mutual friends, even at church on Christmas Eve. Failed marriages were dissected gently but thoroughly in suburban communities. "Do you care what people think?" she asked. He considered the question honestly. "Less than I used to." Across the city, Clara stepped outside her parents' house into the brittle winter air. Her phone buzzed with a message from Graham, brief, logistical, detached. She did not respond. Instead, she scrolled to Daniel's last message. She felt suspended between 2 versions of herself, the woman who calculated risk and the one who now understood consequence. Her mother's words lingered. "Pride or honesty?" She typed slowly. "I told my parents. The truth. I'm done hiding." She stared at the message for a long moment before sending it. Downtown, Daniel's phone vibrated as he listened to Marissa list practicalities, lawyers, timelines, the realities of divorce in Massachusetts. He glanced at the screen. He did not respond immediately. Family voices had made one thing clear. This was no longer a private fracture. It was a choice that would ripple outward, through holidays, through shared friends, through the narrative others would tell about them. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. For the first time, the question before him felt less about betrayal and more about identity. Was he the kind of man who rebuilt what was broken? Or the kind who refused to inhabit a structure once it failed inspection? Outside, the afternoon light thinned toward evening. In 2 separate corners of Boston, husband and wife sat with the weight of expectation pressing in from all sides. And neither of them could pretend the decision ahead belonged only to them anymore. The email arrived at 6:12 a.m. Executive Committee Review, mandatory attendance. No ambiguity this time. No informal language. Clara read it while standing in her kitchen, the Brookline house still half-lit by dawn. Daniel's absence lingered in the quiet. The empty hook where his coat once hung, the second mug untouched beside the sink. She had slept there again the night before, alone in their bedroom, as if proximity to familiar walls might stabilize something inside her. It hadn't. Her phone buzzed with another message moments later. "Graham, we stay aligned. Answer only what's asked." Aligned. She stared at the word until it blurred. At 8 a.m., she walked into Bennett and how knowing something irreversible was about to occur. The glass lobby reflected her image back at her. Dark suit, measured stride, composure carefully arranged. Inside the executive conference room, Margaret Chun, Robert Langford, and 2 additional partners sat waiting. A legal pad rested in front of Margaret. A digital recorder lay on the table between them. "Clara," Margaret began, voice calm but firmer than before. "We've received additional information." Clara took her seat. "Regarding?" "Multiple staff members confirm you and Graham were seen entering Harbolite well after the client dinner concluded. Additionally, there are discrepancies in the billing timeline." "Discrepancies?" Robert leaned forward slightly. "We're not concerned about personal morality. We're concerned about fiduciary integrity." The phrasing struck her. Not morality. Integrity. "Is there a personal relationship between you and Mr. Holloway that compromises your professional judgment?" Margaret asked directly. The question hung in the air like a sealed envelope waiting to be opened. Clara felt the weight of 2 futures pressing against her ribs. In one, she denied. Minimally. Carefully. The review would likely end with a formal warning, perhaps a delay in partnership consideration. Graham's name would remain insulated. The firm would prefer containment. In the other, she told the full truth. Named him, named the duration, named the hotel suite and the blurred lines between mentorship and intimacy. The fallout would be immediate, public, uncontrollable. She thought of Daniel asking in the wine bar, "Do you love him?" She thought of her father's voice, pride, or honesty. She thought of Graham adjusting his cufflinks while speaking of precaution. "Yes," she said. The word landed without tremor. Margaret did not look surprised. For how long? 3 months. And did this relationship influence any decision related to the merger? Clara hesitated. Influence was difficult to quantify, but concealment was easier to define. "Yes," she said again. It compromised boundaries, even if outcomes weren't altered. Robert's pen paused mid-note. "Is Mr. Holloway involved?" Margaret asked. There it was, the final threshold. Clara could still soften the answer. Frame it as unilateral. Protect him in exchange for the illusion of dignity. She lifted her chin slightly. "Yes, he is." Silence expanded across the table. Margaret reached for the recorder, pressing a button to ensure clarity. "For the record, you are stating that a mutual relationship existed between you and senior partner Graham Holloway?" "I am." The words felt less like confession and more like excavation. Outside the glass walls, associates moved through the corridor, unaware of the tectonic shift occurring within. Robert cleared his throat. "You understand the implications?" "Yes." Suspension, internal investigation, media risk, partnership indefinitely postponed, if not revoked entirely. But for the first time in weeks, Clara felt something close to steadiness. After the meeting, she returned to her office. Graham was already there, standing beside her desk. "What did you say?" he demanded, his composure thinner now. "The truth." His jaw tightened. "You were supposed to be careful." "I was." "You named me?" "Yes." For a moment, genuine anger flickered across his face. Unfiltered, unstrategic. "Do you realize what you've done?" She held his gaze evenly. Corrected the narrative. "You've jeopardized everything." "No," she replied quietly. "We did that." The distinction hung between them. He stepped back, recalculating. "This will become formal. There will be hearings. Press inquiries if it leaks." "I know. And your partnership is already gone," she finished. The clarity startled even her. Graham stared at her as if seeing her for the first time, not as a protege, not as an accomplice, but as a liability who had chosen self-preservation through exposure. "This isn't strategic," he muttered. "No," she agreed. "It's honest." He left without another word. Clara sat slowly in her chair, staring at the skyline Daniel once loved to sketch. Transparency was no longer an architectural ideal, it was consequence. Her phone buzzed. "Daniel." She answered this time. "I told them," she said before he could speak. "Told them what?" "Everything. About him. About me." There was a pause on the line, not of shock, but absorption. "Why?" he asked. "Because I'm done pretending I can manage two realities." Silence settled between them, not empty, not resolved, just open. "They'll investigate," she continued. "I might lose my position. And you're okay with that?" She looked around her office, the diplomas, the framed commendations, the city beyond the glass. "No," she admitted. "But I'm more afraid of losing whatever integrity I have left." On the other end, Daniel exhaled slowly. For the first time since he left the house, something shifted, not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition. The choice had been made, not in a wine bar, not in a hotel suite, but in a conference room under fluorescent light. And it would cost her. The question now was whether cost alone was enough to rebuild anything that had already fractured. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, persistent, indifferent. Transparency, once avoided, now stood in plain sight. The firm announced the investigation the following Tuesday. Not by email blast, not dramatically, just a controlled internal memorandum outlining an inquiry into professional conduct involving 2 senior members. Names were not listed, but in glass offices with thin walls, anonymity was symbolic at best. By noon, Clara's access to certain case files had been restricted. By 3, her name had been quietly removed from the merger's leadership page on the firm website. She watched the digital erasure happen in real time. Her office, once a space of upward trajectory, felt transitional now, a place she might soon vacate. She packed nothing, but her gaze lingered on framed certificates as if inventorying them for removal. Graham issued his own statement to the board that afternoon, carefully phrased. He acknowledged a lapse in judgment, while emphasizing that no financial impropriety had occurred. His decades of standing within the firm functioned like insulation. Clara received a different tone. Margaret Chin called her in privately. "Your admission has been noted," Margaret said. "The committee appreciates your candor. However, partnership consideration will be suspended indefinitely pending outcome." Suspended indefinitely. The words did not surprise her. They landed like a door closing softly rather than slamming. "There may also be external implications," Margaret continued. "We advise you to prepare for reputational impact." Reputational impact. The language of consequence was always clinical. When Clara left the building that evening, no one stopped her. No one confronted her directly. The isolation was subtler than hostility. Her phone buzzed as she stepped onto the sidewalk. "Daniel, can we talk?" he asked when she answered. "Yes." They met again at the river walk near the apartment he had rented. The sky was washed in late winter gray, the air cold enough to sharpen breath. Daniel stood with his hands in his coat pockets when she approached. For a moment, they simply faced each other, two people recalibrating after impact. "They're investigating," she said first. "I've been removed from the case." He nodded. He had read enough between the lines to expect it. "And Graham?" "Still a partner. For now." A faint tightening appeared in his jaw. Not outrage, just recognition of imbalance. They began walking slowly along the river. Their steps fell out of sync at first before settling into a quiet rhythm. "I meant what I said," Clara continued. "I told them everything. I know. I could have minimized it. But you didn't." They walked in silence for several yards. Wind brushed against the water, creating small ripples that distorted reflections of the skyline. Daniel stopped near a railing. "Consequences don't automatically fix trust." She nodded. "I'm not expecting them to." "That's good." He studied her carefully. The composure she once carried like armor had softened. Not vanished, but cracked. "I keep thinking about that night," he said. "About how easily you compartmentalized it." "I thought I could control it," she admitted. "I was wrong." "Yes." There was no cruelty in his agreement. Only fact. "I don't know how to undo what I did," she said quietly. "I only know I don't want to lie anymore." The honesty felt stripped of strategy now. No defense. No negotiation. Daniel looked out across the river. "When I left the house, I thought clarity would feel powerful. And it didn't. It felt empty." She swallowed. "Do you still want a divorce?" He did not answer immediately. The question required more than reaction. It required identity. "I spoke to a lawyer," he said finally, "just to understand the process." Her shoulders stiffened slightly, but she did not interrupt. "I haven't filed anything." The distinction mattered. "Why not?" she asked. "Because I'm trying to figure out whether I'm walking away from betrayal or from us." The phrasing lingered between them. She stepped closer, not touching him, but closing physical distance. "There's still an us?" "I don't know," he replied honestly. "That depends on whether what we had was real or just convenient." Her throat tightened. "It was real. Then why did you risk it?" The question carried less accusation now and more inquiry. "Because I tied my worth to being exceptional," she said. "And when someone made me feel exceptional in a different way, I confused it for something I deserved." He absorbed that. "And with me?" he asked. "I felt safe," she said. "I didn't realize I was mistaking safety for invisibility." The wind intensified briefly, cutting through layers of fabric. Daniel considered her words carefully. For months, maybe years, he had relied on stability as proof of love. Predictability. Shared routines. He had assumed that was enough. "I don't know if I can trust you again," he said. "But I also don't want to decide out of pride." She nodded. "Neither do I." They stood there as evening settled over the city. Office lights flickered on one by one across the skyline, structures illuminated from within. "Therapy," he said suddenly. "If there's even a chance, we start there. No guarantees. No pretending." Her breath caught slightly. It wasn't forgiveness. But it wasn't finality either. I'll go, she said. And transparency, he added. Complete. Yes. He looked at her for a long moment. If at any point I feel like you're protecting your image more than this marriage, I'm done. She met his gaze steadily. That's fair. They did not embrace. They did not promise reconciliation. But they did not walk away in opposite directions either. For the first time since Harbolite, the future did not feel like a closed door or a dramatic exit. It felt conditional, fragile, earned slowly, if at all. Above them, the skyline stood unchanged, glass and steel against darkening sky. Some structures collapsed completely. Others required demolition before rebuilding. Daniel wasn't sure which theirs would be. But for now, neither of them stepped back. By early summer, Boston had shifted from gray restraint to cautious warmth. The trees along the Charles filled in again, softening the skyline Daniel once sketched in sharp winter lines. Light lingered longer in the evenings. Windows stayed open past sunset. Time had moved, whether they were ready for it or not. Clara no longer occupied the corner office overlooking the river. The firm's investigation had concluded quietly. No financial misconduct, no client loss, but serious breach of professional boundaries. Graham retained his partnership after a formal reprimand and temporary suspension from leadership committees. Clara was offered a choice: remain at the firm under reduced authority, indefinitely removed from partnership consideration, or resign discreetly. She resigned. The announcement was brief, framed as a transition toward independent consultancy. Polite. Sanitized. The legal world understood what it meant. She began working from a smaller office space in Cambridge, taking on compliance and ethics advisory work for mid-sized companies, ironically specializing in boundary frameworks and corporate governance. The work paid less. It demanded humility. It required her to articulate standards she had once blurred. She did not hide from that irony. Daniel remained in the downtown apartment for 3 months. Therapy sessions began awkwardly, two people sitting on opposite ends of a couch, answering clinical questions about trust and resentment. They learned the vocabulary of rupture, emotional neglect, validation seeking, avoidant conflict patterns, words that felt impersonal but precise. Trust did not return dramatically. It rebuilt in increments. Shared calendars, open phones, hard conversations that once would have been postponed. But even with effort, something essential had altered. One evening in late May, they sat at the kitchen table in the Brookline house, the house Daniel had eventually returned to, though not fully. He had moved some belongings back. Others remained packed in storage. The fruit bowl still sat in the center. This time, it was half empty. I got an offer in New York, Clara said quietly. He looked up. Consulting. Yes. A firm focusing on corporate ethics restructuring. He let the words settle. Would you take it? It would mean relocating. Starting over. Starting over. The phrase had followed them for months, undefined. And us? He asked. She met his gaze directly. That's what I'm trying to understand. They had rebuilt communication. They had dissected motives. They had acknowledged wounds. But love, once uncomplicated, now required examination before expression. I don't want to move just to escape what happened here, she said. And I don't want to stay just to prove something. He appreciated the distinction. Silence lingered. Not tense, not fragile. Just honest. In therapy, their counselor had asked a question neither of them answered immediately. Are you rebuilding this marriage because you're afraid of being alone, or because you believe it can become something better than it was? They were still considering that. Daniel had changed too. He took fewer late-night projects. He declined a redevelopment contract that would have required months of travel. He no longer assumed stability was self-sustaining. But he also recognized something quieter and more difficult. Forgiveness did not erase memory. I don't hate you, he said softly that evening. I know, but I don't look at us the same way. I don't either. The honesty felt less like rupture now and more like shared acknowledgement. Outside, children rode bicycles along the sidewalk. A neighbor watered hydrangeas. Ordinary life unfolded without commentary. If we stay married, he continued, it has to be because we're choosing each other now, not because we once did. She nodded slowly. And if we don't, then we end it without pretending it was meaningless. The words carried grief, but not hostility. Weeks later, they signed separation papers. Not in fury, not in spectacle. At a modest office in downtown Boston with neutral carpeting and framed landscapes on the wall. They divided assets methodically. The house would be sold. Proceeds split. When the documents were complete, they stepped outside together into the bright June afternoon. "This isn't how I imagined it ending," Clara said. "It's not how I imagined us either," he replied. There were no dramatic final embraces. No declarations of eternal regret. But there was recognition. They had loved each other. That remained true. They had failed each other. That remained true too. Months later, Daniel stood inside a nearly completed community arts center in Somerville, the project he had once abandoned midway through design. Sunlight streamed through expansive glass panels, illuminating open spaces meant for gathering, for visibility. He had redesigned parts of it after everything, removed unnecessary partitions, created fewer blind corners. Transparency, this time, was intentional. Across state lines, Clara walked through her new Manhattan office, smaller than her old one, but hers alone. On her desk sat a simple silver frame containing a photo from years ago. She and Daniel on a windy Cape Cod afternoon, eyes squinting against sunlight. She kept it not as an anchor, but as acknowledgement. Some relationships do not survive betrayal. Some survive, but transform into something unrecognizable. And some end not because love disappears, but because trust, once fractured, cannot return to its original shape. In different cities, under different skylines, Daniel and Clara carried forward the same lesson. Secrecy erodes quietly. Honesty rebuilds slowly. And sometimes, the most difficult act of love is letting go before resentment replaces what was once real. The sun set over Boston that evening, casting long reflections across the river, light fractured by movement, beautiful despite distortion.